Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tea Talks Roundtable, where we share tea and conversations with a group of visionary herbalists connecting people, plants, and planet. I'm Jiling, your host, acupuncture and herbalist in Ventura, California, ancestral homelands of the Chumash. Today, we'll be discussing the art of the herbal interview with some of my favorite herbal podcasters. We've got Mason Hutchison of HerbRally, Rosalee de la Forêt of Herbs with Rosalee, and myself and my fellow Herbal Radio interviewer, Thomas Dick. So a little introduction to each of our interviewees for today, beginning with Mason. Mason Hutchison is the founder of HerbRally, a herbal community hub that promotes herbalism education and events, and the host of the Herbalist Hour, a podcast and YouTube series where he interviews a diverse array of plant people. Mason, will you share a little bit about where you're joining us from today and tell us about your podcast?
Sure. Thank you, Jiling. I did not know you were Team Herb, by the way, versus Team Herb. But all right. So, yeah, I'm the host of the Herbalist Hour, along with the HerbRally podcast. And so I'm actually calling here, it's kind of random, but I'm at Rosemary Gladstar's home in Vermont, so that's pretty cool. But typically, I'm based in Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin. And so a little bit about the podcast. It started back in 2017. We've published technically over like 750 episodes. Granted, they're anywhere from 60 seconds long all the way up to 3.5 hours long. So there's a wide range of types of podcasts that we produce. But only recently, I want to say in the past maybe like 14 months, did I actually start interviewing different people. Everybody on this roundtable has been on the show. In fact, Jiling was the very first episode. So that was very special at your home in Ventura, California. So that's just a little bit about it. HerbRally is a mix of interviews, herbal conference recordings, just all of the above. So that's just a little bit about it.
So happy to have you here at Rosemary's home with my home in the background and all these other homes.
Yeah. That's right.
So introducing Rosalee. Rosalee de la Forêt is passionate about helping you explore the world of herbalism and nature connection. Over the past 20 years, she's been a herbal products maker, clinician, and author. These days, Rosalee spends most of her time teaching online courses and hosting the Herbs with Rosalee podcast and YouTube channel. Rosalee, where are you joining us from today? And tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jiling. Hello, everyone. I am calling in from my home here in the Methow Valley, which is Eastern Washington. And yes, I have the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, which is every episode focuses mostly on a singular plant. And we look at how plants heal through as food, as medicine, and through nature connection. And I do solo shows where I just kind of deep dive into a plant. And then I also do interviews as well.
Wonderful. And then Thomas is the EVP and CBO, which I don't know what those stand for, but you can let us know, at Mountain Rose Herbs, and is the host of the Herbal Radio podcast. Thomas is born and raised in Appalachia and has been in the field of graphic design and marketing for over 25 years. And Thomas has spent the last 15 years building up Mountain Rose. Thomas, where are you joining us from, and tell us about Herbal Radio?
I'm here in Eugene, Oregon, headquarters of Mountain Rose Herbs. CBO is Chief Brand Officer. But that's a tough one. So unlike everyone else on this podcast right now, everybody here are masters at herbalism. I'm just, sort of herbal adjacent. I'm definitely been a part of Mountain Rose Herbs for 15 years in the, marketing and brand side of things. But, to call myself an herbalist would be a pretty far stretch. But what I love to do is I love to talk to passionate people, and I love to ask questions with passionate people about why they do what they do. And so that's kind of what my podcast is about, is just bringing on these herbalists and scientists and just talking to them about how did you get from point A to point B, and hopefully trying to inspire people that are out there that are listening that they can also get from that point A to point B. So that's the whole idea behind my podcast. And we just, unlike I think a lot of podcasts, and especially the one, podcasters here, there's not a whole lot of background into my podcast. I don't try to like study up. I really want it to be kind of an organic conversation, and we just let the person that I'm interviewing sort of just steer it wherever they want to go. And I just try to ask, questions along the way as a novice. So it's a totally different approach, I think, than a lot of the different podcasts on herbs.
So Thomas and I both speak and interview folks for the Herbal Radio podcast with Mountain Rose, of which Mason was the instigator that got me into doing that to begin with. So in talking about origins and considering origins of these podcasts that are reaching thousands and thousands of listeners around the globe for some of us, what's been the evolution of your herbal podcast? For whoever wants to start.
Do you mind if we actually start with you and hear about where you're calling in from and like a little bit more about your show?
Thank you so much, Mason. Forgot.
That's all right.
Yeah. So I'm an acupuncturist and herbalist in Ventura, California, and I teach, and I also do clinical work, and I also love traveling and making art and going on wild adventures, surfing, backpacking, etc. Life is good. So I've been hosting tea talks with Jiling through the Mountain Rose Herbs Herbal Radio and Tea Talks Roundtable, which is a newer iteration of that since 2022, when Bevan Clare was doing interviews on the same podcast. And I commented to Mason, "Oh, I love it. If you need someone else to do it, then let me know." And Mason's like, "Jiling, just join us." So I did. So
That's
it's
awesome.
been 2 years and going strong now, and we're releasing episodes from me about once a month. And I guess one of my strong points is if I really enjoy something, then I keep going. So we're going.
That's great.
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Mason.
For sure.
Yeah, so going back to that question about herbal evolution or podcast evolution, I guess we went in the direction speaking a little bit about the evolution of the Herbal Radio podcast. Mason, what was it like before I came on? Where did it come from?
Oh, as far as the Herbal Radio goes, or HerbRally
Yeah, because
podcast?
that one, they happened together in your timeline, right?
Yeah, I would say they're similar, perhaps. Actually, honestly, Herbal Radio, presented by MountainRoseHerbs.com, has probably been around since, I want to say, 2013, and started as a way to release free herbalism project recordings. So it was a way to kind of expand the free event that Mountain Rose Herbs so generously produces each and every year. In fact, I want to say, as we're recording, this is happening right now, even perhaps the online version. But yeah, so Herbal Radio goes way back to actually Rosemary Gladstar was the very first episode, or actually it might have been Rose Madrone and then Rosemary Gladstar, and those were just recordings of the event. And then since then, they've essentially been audio versions of, say, YouTube videos that Mountain Rose Herbs would put out, and then just a whole bunch of other different herbal content. Actually, very kind of similar to what HerbRally was. HerbRally started back in 2000. The podcast started back in 2017. The very first episode was me reaching out to my good friends Katja Swift and Rin Madura if they wanted to record an episode on how to start a free herbal clinic. And basically from there, it was just grew. I would reach out to different herb conferences if they wanted to provide audio from there. I would hire different people to record monographs. And just I would get bits and pieces and random interviews and different audio from all sorts of different herbalists from around the community. And it just kind of evolved that way. And it's funny because I always wanted to host my own interview show, but I was way too nervous and shy and scared of what judgment people might have had of me. Like, oh, I'm going to say this thing on the internet, and people will forever be like, Mason, you were wrong about that. You know, I'm going to point out this little tidbit that you said here about this herbal random thing that was totally wrong. And I was so scared about judgment and everything. And finally, I worked up the nerve, just like we said 14 months ago, to start the doing interviews for the Herbalist Hour, which is one of the programs on the HerbRally podcast. And man, it's the best thing that I've ever done, because it's my favorite part about my job now at HerbRally is to produce and create these interviews with all of my best friends. You know what I mean? So it's kind of evolved over the years. We still do publish various herb conference clips and different, recordings that folks send us, but primarily now the HerbRally podcast has evolved into numerous shows. We've got HerbRally podcast, Herbalist Hour. We actually have the Plant Healer's Path with Jesse Wolf Hardin, and 6 Questions with Bev and Claire, and there's just all sorts of other stuff going on. So it's evolved quite a bit, but it's still kind of the same. It's just the smorgasbord of the herbal community. So.
Yeah, and I just want to say you've been so prolific. I remember that period of time when you were releasing an episode every single day. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how Mason, wild man. Yeah.
That's why I cut back on that, because I realized how ridiculous that was. But
yeah.
Amazing.
How about you, Rosalee?
What's that?
You're making us all look bad with that, Mason. So.
Yeah, that was my goal. Yeah.
Oh, it's cool to hear, Mason, just like how, like I was there from day one seeing you do all these things, and it was just kind of cool to hear the summary of it. And yeah, just how you did all these different things and kind of like you found following your passion and seeing what stuck. And I'm sure with you, it's going to continue, to keep evolving. We'll just see how, who knows what's next with Mason. I feel with mine, it's a little bit different in that I did not envision myself being a podcast host. That was not like something that was on the horizon for me. But I feel like my job as an herbal teacher is to be of service to my audience. And so I often survey my audience and say, like, what would you like? What are you looking for? And one survey I sent out, I was very surprised to see that people wanted to hear a podcast and a YouTube station. So I was like, okay. And at first I was like, yeah, that might not be my calling. But then it kind of sat with me for a while, and I warmed up to the idea. And I did have a first idea. My first idea for the podcast, which I hope someone does this podcast sometime. But my idea at first was to do how people are working with plants to change the world for the better. And I had like examples of people who are doing that. And I thought, oh, that'd be so cool to really talk about kind of like grassroots movements and how things are going. Ultimately, though, I think that would be hard to find guests for. Like it's, it'd be like, it's just kind of like such a niche. It'd be a really it'd take a lot of work to find the guests. But one idea that I'm excited about for people who are thinking about podcasts is like the 10 episode podcast, so it doesn't have to be like forever and ever and ever, but, doing this kind of like little sandwich. But anyway, so that was my first idea, and I loved the idea, but I just it didn't feel like totally right. And then when I got the idea to focus on a single herb, it was one of those moments, because that is pretty much what I do in all of my work anyway. So it felt very obvious to do that. And I also really wanted to just feel that whole look at plants. So it's not like, what are uses of plants? I'm going to tell you 10 uses of plants, but really looking at plants as beings, as how we work with them for food and nutrition, through medicine, and also through nature connection. And so that was really important to me. And so that started 3 years ago. I think we just released episode 143. I do them pretty much weekly. We're taking a couple weeks off a year, just for holidays and that sort of thing. And in the beginning, I had a lot more solo episodes, and I hope to get back to those. But solo episodes, because they're these really in-depth dives, they take almost like a week of production on my part. Researching the herb, writing the script, getting the script done, doing the B-roll. I'm really into aesthetics, so it takes me a long time to do that. So a lot goes into that. And so lately I've been really leaning heavily on the interviews, which have been so much fun. And and then with that, there's still a lot of production work, but it's less for me. Like I always tell the people I'm interviewing, like I just show up and we have fun. And then everyone else does a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about what behind the scenes look like. That was one of my curiosities for all you other interviewing folks.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay. So right as I started the podcast, I brought on a new staff member, Nicole Paul. And so she is my project manager for the YouTube and podcast. They just mirror each other. And so she does so much. She really is I often tell people I just work for Nicole. And she's brilliant at like making sure, project managing. So like making sure all these moving parts are happening, because as the podcast has gone on, there's been a lot more moving parts. Last time I counted, there's 10 people who work on the podcast in total. So she's now she's like reaching out, doing guest outreach, communicating with the guests before and after. And then there's so many moving parts to the actual thing, getting the video edited, getting the audio edited, getting transcripts done, writing up show notes. Then there's the recipe, which from the beginning, I knew I always wanted to have a recipe with every show, because I'm very into practicality and I want people to feel empowered to work with herbs on their own and not just listen to me or listen to whoever, but just feel excited and inspired to do something with the plants. So there's always a recipe. And in the beginning, I was just like creating recipes, like formatting them on Canva myself. And then that slowly evolved to work with Tatiana, our botanical illustrator. And so now she illustrates all of the recipes. That all like takes time. So now there's a lot more time it takes before we can get the show up. Like earlier this year, I remember I interviewed someone on Tuesday, and on Friday they asked if it would be up by the next day, because they graciously wanted to send it out on their newsletter. And I was like, no, that's just not how that happens. So yeah, and then so we have the recipe cards, and then so much goes into it too, of like promoting it on social media, and then the people respond if people have questions on social media, and responding to comments once it comes out. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes for each and every episode, which is just amazing that I have the team to help with that. I'm very grateful for everyone who's working on that with me. And yeah, it's become a big part of our focus really throughout the whole company, is getting this out every week.
Amazing. Well, I will say that the work shows. The recipe cards are gorgeous. The interviews I love listening to. I love that it's a single plant focus, and I feel like I learn a lot and get to learn about not only the plant but also the herbalist. And just well done, Rosalee. Love that. Thomas, what's our behind the scenes like, and anything else to add about the evolution of Herbal Radio that Mason hasn't spoken to already?
Well, behind the scenes, we've got Gracie and we have Haley, and I found that success for me is surrounding myself with people that are smarter and more talented than I am, and that's that's what I do. So those two take on the burden of editing and putting the show together, getting the guests, lining up the guests and all of that. So and cutting out all of the weird things that I say throughout the podcast. So maybe one day we'll release an unedited, version of one of my podcasts, and people will be like, oh boy, that was so. As far as the continuing with Mason, I mean, Mason really took on Herbal Radio when he was here and made it, I think, what it is today. I was lucky enough to have it sort of already in place for myself, and when someone suggested, hey, what if you took on the interviews, I was a little bit taken back by that, because I never thought about ever being podcast before. That's not what I do. But I thought that why not? I'll give it a try and see what happens. And I'm happy that that people love to talk, and they love to talk about what they're passionate about. So it makes my job really, really easy. You can come in and you can almost have like a set, just like kind of these set questions. Starting out with just where are you from, and how did you what was your childhood like? Well, how did you get into plants? What was that first time that you were inspired by plants? Something like that. And it just really sparks that conversation. It's a catalyst for the rest of the interview. And then you just kind of go from there. So kind of going a little bit away from your first question, but the behind the scenes, Gracie, and really taking care of the art, and Haley really focusing on the interviewee. And then the involvement of Herbal Radio is just, we're continuing to talk a lot about what we want to do next and how we want to make it better, and get more audience involvement is something that we're focusing on right now. So really wanting to have the audience weigh in on what they want to hear about who they want us to interview and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I will say for my side with the Tea Talks and Tea Talks Roundtable, I'm learning to ask for help. Like Haley just started helping me with outreach to folks that I want to interview. I'm mainly choosing who I want to interview. When I reach out to folks, there's a little question at the bottom. If you have other folks that you think that I should interview, I am prioritizing the voices of herbal elders and BIPOC folks. But please give me your recommendations, and then I'll do a little research and I'll reach out. But now that's changed to Haley will reach out. Oh, what a luxury to have help. What a luxury. So I'm learning to lean into that a little bit. But otherwise, oh man, Rosalee, when you were talking about the behind the scenes stuff, I do research on the person. I figure out my own questions, the flow, who to speak with. I reach out to them. There's a lot of radio silence usually of all the people that I reach out to. Maybe only 10%, if I'm lucky, will actually respond. Folks are busy, especially if you're a herbalist and you're doing all the great things. It's hard to say yes to yet another thing which may or may not pay, and I try to make it explicit that Mountain Rose, we do pay when folks interview with us for the Tea Talks, for the Tea Talk Roundtable. We will make a donation somewhere, but you know, it's another thing to add on to the plate of a already busy, diverse, and exciting herbalist plate. And then for the Tea Talks interviews, I feel like me and Thomas, our style of interviewing is similar, like the style of general herbal interview or any other interview where you ask about the person's origins and some plants that they love and how are you working with plants, and, you know, go in that direction of getting to know the person and what their relationship with plants is like and how that might benefit other people who are listening. And then with the roundtables, like with this one, we get the magic of bringing together people who may or may not know each other and expanding the role of facilitator so that it's not just me asking questions, but we can ask each other questions and have more of a organic group conversation. And there have been some roundtables in which people have continued friendships after the interview has completed, and that makes my heart really sing. So I love that community aspect. And also it makes it a little bit easier for me as the interviewee, but behind the scenes, it's a little bit of a nightmare. It's hard to bring a bunch of people and all their different schedules together. What's behind the scenes like for you, Mason?
Yeah, a lot. But, you know, before we get into that, I want to say I love that Thomas took on the role of host at Herbal Radio. Or when you first told me that you were doing this, Thomas, I was just so like proud and happy. And I was like, the fact that you don't self-identify as an herbalist, but you're such an inquisitive and great conversationalist, I thought it was kind of a perfect thing. And not only that, but you've got a great radio voice.
That's the only reason they asked me.
Yeah. But besides that, I mean, I want to say somewhere I heard that Larry King goes into his interviews without any prep. He's just a naturally gifted conversationalist. Now, I want to say Thomas might be like, say, the Larry King of the herbal world, because am I correct in that? Did I just make that up? Do you know if that's true, Thomas?
I don't know if that's true, but it sounds correct. So
it sounds good. Yeah.
No, it's correct. Come on, it's correct.
But yeah, it was just so cool, and I love that you have plant stories. You've got what's the one where you interview? What's the one that I was on? Interviews. Interviews. Which, by the way, after I re-listened to my episode where I was interviewed, I got to say that was my favorite episode. It was a joke. Sorry.
I got a little confused.
Okay.
I was going with it. I was like, yeah.
Mine as well. Yeah. No, I was on your podcast, and that was my favorite episode.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just funny because after I get interviewed, sometimes I was like, man, I think I just really botched that. Then afterwards I listened. I was like, oh, that wasn't so bad. That was a good conversation. Anyways.
That's something we've got to get into a little bit later on. Is just that about not taking yourself so serious when you're doing this. But
absolutely.
We can talk about that a little bit.
That's why I made that bad joke just there. Exactly. Okay, so behind the scenes. So I was interviewed by Christosina Dinos. She's a wonderful herbalist based in Arcata, California. For my 100th episode, she actually interviewed me, and it was a 2.5-hour interview. And one of her questions was, she gave me the questions ahead of time. How much time do you spend per episode? And at the time, we were coming out with 2 Herbalist Hour episodes per week. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never really tallied or thought about how much time we spend per episode. Each episode each episode of the Herbalist Hour, at least, is 7 hours of production. Now that's going to be anywhere from, say, 1 to 2 hours of research. There's the actual interview itself. There's the post-production. There's the marketing. Also, not to mention, say, all the scheduling and all that jazz. So there's a lot of stuff that goes behind each individual episode. But yeah, I mean, I kind of just outlined it there. It's each guest that comes on. Before I started the podcast, you're kind of in the dark. You're like, how do you do this? And then I never really understood the research part. Research for each episode actually became one of my favorite parts of the episode, because each individual herbalist, everyone who comes on the Herbalist Hour, pretty much I already kind of know. So I already have a kind of a general idea of where to start the research. But then it's fun to just kind of peruse their websites, their social media, previous interviews they've done. So for whatever podcast I'm listening to that week, I'm searching out for what podcasts they've been on already before, and just kind of get to feel of their personality and everything. So yeah, it's research has become a very big part of the Herbalist Hour. It's one of my favorite parts. And then yeah, just everything else that goes into it. I got to shout out Amanda, co-owner, my wife at HerbRally, and she does. So the Herbalist Hour is both an audio and visual podcast. And so since she ends up editing each and every individual episode, that basically takes care of the editing on my side. So that's really wonderful. And she does a great job with that. She's also obviously makes everything look way better than HerbRally used to look before she came on board. And the other thing about HerbRally or the Herbalist Hour interviews is a lot of times they're done in person. And that ends up being a lot more of a heavy lift for Amanda, because obviously it's going to be way more editing than a Zoom interview or whatever. So yeah, 7 hours ish per episode, once to twice a week. That ends up becoming 7 to 14 hours per week of production per episode. So it really is a lot of work, way more than I anticipated when we first started. I thought it was just like, oh yeah, it's an hour interview. Nope. There's so much that goes into play. Fortunately, most of it is quite pleasurable, and we really love doing it. Like I said before, it's my favorite part about HerbRally. So
what do you think makes for a great interview? At the end of all this preparation, after you've had the conversation with the person, what makes you walk away going like, oh man, that was great?
Do you want me to take that on first?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so as I've just mentioned, in-person interviews are by far my favorite. There just seems to be this energetic connection that you're able to get in person. That said, I've had countless amazing Zoom interviews, and I don't even necessarily want to put it on the guest's responsibility. I noticed that if I go into it well-rested, nourished, but I didn't eat literally right beforehand, I'm in the right headspace, I do like a little prayer beforehand or something, you get in this like conversational mode, and then you allow yourself to just like speak freely. You don't have judgments. You don't start getting too caught up on like, oh, I should say this next. You just really try to get in this conversational mode, an open mind. You stay vulnerable yourself as a host, and whether that's in person or in Zoom, I think that that's going to be one of your keys to a great episode, and then the audience is going to notice too. So I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind, but I'll let y'all take it away. Rosalee.
Yeah, I resonate with all of that. It made me think, Mason, that like I have very specific times people can sign up to do the interview, and I do all of mine by Zoom. But yeah, I'm very particular because it is that like I need to be in the right space at the right time, well fed, but not just fed. All of those things you said. I like to do a little bit of research before, but also like you said, like just be in the conversational mode. I think, for me, I do a formulaic show. So I ask the same 4 questions more or less every time. And I did that on purpose. One, because when I first started, I was terrified. And I was like, I just need like to know like the same 4 questions going in. Now I'm much more relaxed, but I'm still like, I just like formulaic stuff myself. Like that's just who I am. So I like it. And, but within that formula, I think the best interviews are when there's that like juicy part and I'm able to like be in the moment and recognize like, ooh, there's something like really cool there. And to be able, you know, to like kind of chase that down a little bit, just like ask for more on that. Like one example is I was interviewing Henriette Kress, and Henriette had said something. So she's from Finland and she was saying something about her German ancestry, like hundreds of years ago, that like each family in this small village was responsible for one plant. And that family was like responsible for harvesting and maintaining a supply of it that would then like be for the rest of it. She just mentioned it super fast in passing. And then this was a couple of years ago. And like throughout the whole interview, I just like kept like my mind kept like going back to that, like, oh, like I need to know more about that. And so at the end, I was just like, you know what, can we just circle back? Like, I just want to go back and talk about that. And she did, and it was so cool. And I'd like to think now, like I'm a slightly bit better at like catching it in the moment, but I'll still circle back to, you know, be like, oh, that was like really juicy. That was a really good part. Let's go back and, you know, get some more info on that. So yeah, it's that moment. And I know Mason, and we've talked about this before. It's like, it is interesting being the interview because you got to be present for the person, but also like you know, kind of like being able to hold on to what they're saying enough to, so that we can like come up with the great next question. So it's always that like balance of doing those two together. And I think I'm getting a little better at it, but I also think I have a long way to go.
Yeah, that's funny because you bring up something that I find when I'm trying to come up with the next question, when I'm listening to someone and I'm thinking about the next question, I don't feel like that I'm present in the moment. And that never really goes well. The best interviews that I have is when I'm not focusing on what I'm going to ask next, when I'm just listening to what they're saying and having that real connection. So that's the hardest part for me. And I say that you know, this whole approach that I take with not really researching, although I do research and I do find out who they are, and I try to do some research, obviously. But what I'm saying about research is that I don't really write out questions, because I tried that on a couple different interviewees and it just did not work because I was hurrying them along. I would want to be like, oh, I've got to get through all of these questions in this certain amount of time. And they're talking about this one particular point way too long. And I'm trying to rush them through it and trying to get to the next question. I'm changing the subject. I'm interrupting. And then I realized, what the hell am I doing? That's not a conversation would go. If you're just hanging out with a friend, you don't do that. You don't have a set of questions that and I understand that approach with some interviews. That's the way, and people are comfortable in that. I just can't figure out that groove. So the interviews that I have that feel the most real are the ones where it's just hanging out, relaxed, and having that conversation. And you can even see it on the interviews, you know, face when I'm watching them or listening to them. There's this sort of a change where they're like, at first they're a bit tense and they're like, oh, I gotta, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is really relaxing, and this is just having a conversation. I'm like, there it is, perfect. Yes, this is what I want. So that's kind of, and I do admire the written out questions and the formulaic approach. I really, really do. I wish I could do it. I wish I could pull it off. It just doesn't feel, it just doesn't feel real for me when I try to do it. So.
Well, I will provide a counterpoint to Thomas's spontaneity.
Please do.
When I'm a guest for other people's podcasts, I really like having a list of potential questions for the direction that we'll go in.
I drove you nuts with that one, didn't I? Yeah. When you were on, when I interviewed you,
I asked you for a list of questions, and Thomas told me I don't do that. And my response was, what? Because there's going to be thousands of people listening, and I want to have some kind of preparation so that I'll feel comfortable. I mean, as teachers who have been teaching for a long time, I guess we should be comfortable speaking in front of a lot of people, but that sense of wanting to be prepared has never gone away for me.
Right. But I think that and I think that's great. And I think being prepared is wonderful and having that approach for sure. But, and this is the point where I was talking, or Mason was talking earlier, and I said we should talk about that, is that being okay with just being yourself, like being okay with making a mistake. At first, when I was doing these interviews, oh my God, I would re-listen to what I've said over and over and be like, I didn't say that right. And it just came across and it was all, garbled and nobody's good. Everyone's gonna think I'm an idiot, right? That's the thing that goes through your head. Everyone's gonna think I'm an idiot. And then I realized, you know what? People talk the way they talk, and as long as you're communicating and having fun, then that's really what it's all about. And so, I think that when I realized, oh, stop taking myself so serious, that was great. That was an amazing moment in when I started doing, or for podcasts, is like, oh, I don't have to be perfect. Anyone else? Did anyone else get that? Or does anyone else feel that? Is that like a moment? Yeah, you got to that. Yeah.
I remember I was terrified to be on YouTube. Like, YouTube commenters are obviously like, it's well known that there's the worst comments there ever. So I was terrified of all of that. Like shaking terrified. But I did it anyway. And my audience is just so incredible. We get, 99% of the comments are so kind and supportive, and which is great. Like, I save all the best comments to share with the guests and stuff. So it's really like, I did have that like pre-fear or whatever, and then it just has been mostly unfounded. And then the criticism I do get, like, some of it's like constructive and helpful. And sure. I just saw today, someone had written as like a podcast review that I had a nice voice, but I was appropriating French culture, which was really crappy thing to do. And I was just like, okay, like really like reaching there because of my last name. They felt like I was appropriating French culture. But for the record, my husband's French by birth, and I am a citizen. And once you're a French citizen, like, you're in, So I just felt like, wow, if that's the only thing you have to say. But, it's kind of like that, like I guess what I'm trying to say is like the criticisms that do come in are easy to shake off, like, because it's just like, they just aren't my audience.
Yeah.
Or I'll get criticism that like there wasn't enough like herbal uses or herbal facts in a given interview or something. And I just think like that wasn't the point. Like, it was a beautiful interview with stories and, it's a really in-depth look at like what it is that we love about this plant that goes so far beyond uses. So if that's somebody's like, they don't like that, then it's just kind of, okay, like, this isn't your podcast. Yeah. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So there's that critical public eye that can be a challenge in being on this really public platform that we get to share. What are some of the other challenges of this work?
Technical stuff. Oh man, that's like the only thing that's like the worst. Like, I do all my interviews via Zoom, or sorry, not Zoom, but I do them on StreamYard, but it's like, same thing. And like, I want to say like 92% of the time it goes fine. And then when it doesn't go fine, it's, very hard. Like, I remember I was interviewing Olita Kumba, my friend, and she was in Kenya, and that was like not good. Like, it took us 2 days to do that interview, and there was so much like stopping and starting, and just the connection wasn't great. And it was such an amazing thing to interview her, and she is so wise. And I feel like both of us was like, that interview was very draining, because it just took so long and just so much stopping and starting. And that can just happen sometimes. Now I'm like pretty used to it in terms of like maybe just getting started. The technical stuff isn't great. I'm pretty good at like being calm and just like hopefully transmitting that calmness to my guests and letting them know like, it's okay. Like, this happens. We'll figure it out, so that it doesn't bleed on to the conversation, which I don't think it really does. But yeah, technical stuff is the kind of my biggest complaint. Really.
I remember I was interviewing Jim McDonald, and we were right in the middle of like the interview, and it was pretty profound, and he was talking away, and then all of a sudden it just cut out, right? And so, oh no, all of everything that he just said, and how am I going to get that back? And so he gets back, and I tell him, I'm like, hey, that cut out, right? And we're going to have to go back. And without missing a beat, he was like, "Well, that was the most profound thing I've ever said in my entire life." Everybody listening gets,
Classic.
it was wonderful, and it was like so funny. And then, of course, you go back to it, but yeah, the technical stuff, I get that a lot, where something's stuck, they're on, because I do everything over Zoom as well, and yeah, you just get technical issues, and you get those glitches. And it does disrupt that conversation quite a bit. You're like, I was right in the middle of something that was so good. How do I get that back? But luckily, again, I've got Gracie in the background who can kind of weave it all together for me. So
one time I forgot to press record. I still get nightmares about that. It was so horrible. And the guest, it was also similarly, the guest was sharing such great things. And I just all of a sudden saw it in my pit in my stomach, and we had to start again, and it wasn't quite the same after that, honestly. But but I just did that once, and I've never let that happen again.
I get nightmares about that too.
Yeah.
I do. It's kind of like going off on a long backpacking trip, and then for the first few miles being like, did I lock my door? Did I lock my door?
How often do you glance up and see the recording in progress, the little light?
I just did it. I just did that. Because we're recording on my Zoom account. Yeah, I do it all the time.
You look up, okay, it's still recording. Okay, yep, we got it.
Yeah. On the interviewee side. Oh, sorry. Keep going, Rosalee.
Were we talking about challenges?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in preparation for this, I was trying to dig deep and be like, okay, what other challenges are there? And so this is a very honest sharing that twice, and I very specifically remember both times, twice, my guest said something that I did not agree with. That was challenging for me, because I didn't know what to do in that moment of because I don't like to make anybody wrong ever. And it's not even that they were wrong, but just I had a different perspective or, different point of view on that. And yeah, that was rough. Both times I just let it go. And both times, I still they haunt me a little bit. I don't know what was what I should have done in those instances. Obviously it doesn't happen a lot, but that was kind of one was a fact, that I kind of felt well, and then other was kind of a perspective that I kind of wish I would just expand it on a little bit. And we could also think of it like this, but in the moment I was deer in the headlights kind of thing. So,
or when they start talking claims. And someone's like, well, I've got the cure for cancer, and and you're like, well, that's never going to make it on the show.
Yeah.
In your story, Rosalee, did you go back and edit those things out, or did you just let them be? Wow.
Yeah, I never edit out. The only things I edit out are technical stuff.
Did you receive any YouTube feedback about that particular claim, or?
I did both times.
Yeah. Do you keep that in the comments section, or do you delete the feedback?
No, the only things I delete in comments are if people are just
plain mean.
Yeah, they are just mean, and that's the only time I delete. Otherwise, even if someone doesn't like it, if they're not mean about it, I let it stay. It's just really meanness that I delete.
Yeah.
So Jiling, you also have to, because we have to be so careful with Mountain Rose Herbs, obviously, with claims. How do you deal with that on your show?
Well, before I chat with people, I'll let them know that we have to steer clear of claims. I'm not totally sure what constitutes a claim, but use your judgment when speaking about stuff. Cite research if it's something research-based. Cite history, historically, the Chinese would use da 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 for da da da, as opposed to just being this does that, which for Mountain Rose, we are not allowed to have that on the show. And then if a claim does come up, because they definitely do still come up where I'll forget to say my blurb in the beginning or something, then I'll make a note, because I'm writing notes the whole time we're talking. And then I'll email Haley and Gracie afterwards and let them know, hey, around here, listen for this and let's cut that out. Yeah, because we're just not allowed to do that.
Mason, do you worry about claims on your show?
Well, after spending 11 years at Mountain Rose Herbs, absolutely. If something is completely outlandish and over the top, like you said earlier, cures cancer, etc., anything over the top, I would definitely delete that. Fortunately, it doesn't happen that often, but I really do have an ear for that. I worked in the marketing department at Mountain Rose Herbs for 10 years, so I'm pretty well versed in that. I do actually remember editing the Mountain Rose Herbs podcast as well, and definitely having to remove some things. And but no, since we don't sell herbal products, I do feel a little more leeway, especially since the guests that I'm having on, I already know they've been vetted because I know them so well. They're experts, and everything that I hear them say is pretty reasonable. And but yeah, since we're not selling herbal products, I feel like I have a lot more leeway than when I did when I was editing the Mountain Rose podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I will say another challenge is sometimes people feel more comfortable speaking in front of an invisible audience than other people. Like I feel like we all try to set the scene like this is a comfortable place. We're just having a conversation. You can follow the flow of the questions, but really we want this to be like you're in my living room and we're having a conversation. But some people are really shy, or maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe it's me, who knows what's going on. But for some guests, it can take a bit of magic to get them to come out into the conversation, and sometimes that magic just doesn't work, and those conversations can feel a little bit challenging, kind of like when I talk with people a lot for work. Also in the clinic, I'm always coaxing people to tell me more about what's going on, and having the conversation for the podcast feels like a similar tell me more, except this is for an audience. Tell me more. So sometimes this can happen in the clinical encounter also, in which I'm like, I'm here for you. Tell me more. And it doesn't come out. And there's this sense of like, oh, what just happened? It's hard.
I always feel when I interview teachers, like teachers are the easiest because they're just so used to being in that like teaching position. So kind of like ask one question and they'll go for quite a while.
Yes.
Yeah. That's definitely, I felt that challenge too. Just occasionally it's like I ask a question and then I get like one sentence back in return and I'm like, okay,
Yes, exactly.
how do I go at this again? Like
exactly. And then you have that awkward silence for you're like, okay, this is going nowhere.
Can I give you the opposite example of this? Do you know what the opposite example is? This happened one time. It was the one time that I was not able to use the episode. And this is, I'm going to kind of put it back on it was my bad, but I asked them, how did you get into herbalism? And then it ended up being a literal 60-minute response where there was never like taking a breath of fresh air. There was never a stop. It was basically like them talking and then answering their own questions. And each time, like they would say some new point, I would be like, oh, I want to address that. Oh, I want to address this. And then the first time I noticed it was about 20 minutes later. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. I'm going to stop them at 30 minutes. And then I was like, it doesn't feel comfortable. And then after 55 minutes, I was like, okay, it's time to wrap up the show. Cause it's the herbal.
That one question.
Yeah, exactly. And, later they emailed me and said, I hope that you, can still use it, and I told them unfortunately not, and then it became this whole uncomfortable situation, and I wasn't trying to be mean. I was willing to re-record it. Just let's take a little bit, but that is the other challenging aspect of a herbal podcast host who wants everybody to like them but understands that that's not possible. It was a very uncomfortable situation, so it's possible to have the completely opposite problem. People just talk forever and ever and ever, and then my what I need to improve upon as a host is to interject more confidently when I see appropriate. But then I'm afraid people are going to be like, "Oh, Mason, you're interrupting them," but it is what it is. So
I am similar.
That.
I do not like to interrupt, and so I will give space there. And I have had that like longer time. Which there's like on my YouTube, there's both of us, like both videos, and sometimes it's like, okay, I'm just like smiling there for 20 minutes. but I really don't like to interject, so
right,
it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, same. usually in conversations, I do better with one-on-one conversations as opposed to big group conversations. I think which partially lends itself to me feeling more comfortable in a teaching role because I know I'm here to talk and I'm not interrupting anybody. The light's on me. So when it's in a more of a group conversation or interjecting, it feels really uncomfortable and unnatural. And I echo the desire to feel more comfortable with it, and which goes back to the having a little bit of a guiding questionnaire / scripty non-script so that we're going somewhere. And when we're going way far off, I have something which is written down to bring us back on track.
Now that's the point of that. Okay. Oh.
Jiling, I gave this guest 20 questions. They already knew what they were getting into. So yeah, because I too, like I notice, I would say maybe 20% of the guests want to know the questions ahead of time, and this particular one actually did. So I gave them the questions ahead of time. I write questions for everybody just so I hit on certain touch points, and this was one of the people. So it was just really interesting because they already knew that there was 19 following questions after that. But
well, maybe it was the 20-hour.
Exactly, it would have been a 20-hour podcast, which would be great for YouTube stats. But yeah, who knows?
Right. Yeah, a few horror stories. How about some of your favorite interviews? What have been some really memorable ones? Yeah.
I'll go first. So my absolute favorite podcast episodes were the one with Jiling Lin, Rosalee de la Forêt, and Thomas Dick.
Mason.
Did he make you guys pay too? Because
I guess, yeah. I have been asked that question before. And it's kind of funny. I was actually telling the truth because my favorite people to interview are always my closest friends. So it was fun to be on all of y'all's podcasts and, share the love in that way. And I said this earlier. Easily my favorite podcasts are the ones that I do in person because there's usually like a staying the night ahead of time, or like, you build a rapport, you build on that friendship, you hang out, and then you sit down and there's like this energy exchange between the people and, in person. And I've actually heard that in feedback, just recently, they commented on the YouTube video like, Mason, these in-person interviews are just so good because you just really feel that rapport and that vibe and that love between the two people. So I would say that, and I know it was a joke, but yeah, having you all on the show, you all are close friends, so absolutely some of my favorite ones are with friends, in person, etc. That's as much as I'll say about that. So
I'm so jealous that you get to interview so many people in person. The only in-person one that I've done thus far was with Thomas, which was with Richo Check right before the Free Herbalism Project last summer. And we were sitting on the end of this big, long, old, gorgeous wooden table in the Mountain Rose Is it the Mercantile? Is that? Mm-hmm. No, the Annex. In the Annex.
Well, it was the Annex space, but yes.
Yeah, and all grouped together around this. We were sharing one microphone, right?
Oh, yeah. Right.
And this tiny little box thing that Thomas DIY'd. And it was just so much fun. It was so much fun.
Yeah. I was squished in between like both of you. And it was so great because both of you were just talking away and so passionately about plants, and it was just, I got to be sandwiched in between that energy.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. It really, really was.
That's cool.
Yeah, the live, there's no duplication for the live experience.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, so that was one of my favorites. How about you, Rosalee?
So I thought of this before Mason said it. I just want that on the When I was thinking of my favorites, Mason came to mind because there is something really fun about interviewing your friends, and just kind of like in a different light, it's like, so I remember after Mason's really thinking like, that was really fun. And of course, Jim McDonald's one of my best friends. And so, that's always a fun time. But I've also really liked interviewing people who I don't know. And then sometimes it's almost like a little sad. Like, I'm like, oh, you could be my new best friend if you live next door. Like I have that feeling with guests, just like, oh, let's hang out. But, they live in England or Florida or whatever. So it's a little bit more difficult. Lucretia Van Dyke is somebody who comes to mind as like, that was really fun.
Oh, so fun.
She shared this recipe for love pancakes, and that's become one of our favorite recipes in our house. So, so I think of her all the time because I'm making her recipe, and that was just a really fun episode as well. So there's so many, though. There's rarely any that like aren't fun. I mean, I can't. There's not really any that come to mind that aren't fun. But yeah, hanging out with friends is always a good time.
That made me think. Oh, keep going, Mason.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, thank you, Jiling. Typically, I don't accept, like, say, your cold outreach people that ask to join the show. But a lot of times, actually, every single time that someone cold outreaches, I will actually vet them. I'll even ask mutual friends, say on Facebook, like, oh, can you vouch for this person to be on the show? And I have been pleasantly surprised by, to your point, Rosalee, like some of my favorite interviewers now have been people I've never met, never even heard of, actually, which is always delightful. So Taryn Forelli, Chief Science Officer over at Traditional Medicinals, was a fantastic interview.
Fantastic.
Never met, right? She was on your show, exactly.
It's so fun, so amazing.
It's so fun, and I was just so thankful that I like followed my intuition on that. So yes, to your point, Rosalee, yes, sometimes strangers can be amazing episodes as well.
Yeah.
You get a lot of like nutraceutical people trying to be on your podcast.
Yeah.
I get that a lot. I would say like 90% of the cold outreach. Like if someone's a grassroots herbalist, then pretty much you can be on my show.
Sure.
I do vet people and like make sure we're a good fit and stuff, but it's like 90% of the cold outreach is really like agencies looking for like the founder of a nutraceutical company to be on, and yeah, and that just doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Thomas, do you have some of your favorites?
Oh, Rosemary changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like she really did. Like that was an incredible interview. Just walking away from it, and then her inspiring the Seed Stewardship Project. That was one of my more proud. That's like one of my most proudest things I've ever been involved in. Is
cool.
That, and that was all because of her.
That's Rosemary Gladstar, for those
Rosemary
who don't know.
Gladstar,
Thomas
yeah.
is referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody out there knows who Rosemary Gladstar is. Jesse Wolf, I've had him on a couple times,
cool.
And God, I have so much fun with him. He's just great, and he's so just such a passionate speaker, so intellectual, and him and I just have like this I don't know, spirit together. We kind of share something, and it's really, really fun. And then I love having Howie on. Howie and Steven. If I can get Howie and Steven on, man, that is the most fun you can have in an hour, really. Those two are just great. So yeah, but I also interviewing your friends like Mason, when I had Mason on, and Jiling, and that. I mean, it is really fun because it's kind of a different approach. It's not so I'm not so nervous about it, I guess.
Yeah.
I just was like, oh, I'm just hanging out with my friends. So yeah.
So Rosalee, you mentioned Jim and Lucretia. I got to be at the Free Herbalism project with them, and also have them and Kimberly Gallagher and I can't remember who else on for a conversation, a Tea Talks Roundtable about aphrodisiacs. And that was one of my favorite conversations because it got dirty without getting totally dirty. And we ended with like kind of botanica erotica poetry that's appropriate for the radio. And it was just like so much giggles throughout. It was fantastic.
I'm gonna have to tune into that one.
Yeah, that one was really fun.
That's awesome.
So as we're getting close to wrapping up, Land, what are your tips for folks who are interested in either starting a podcast or getting onto someone else's podcast?
I have lots of opinions.
Me too. But you go first, Rosalee.
Oh, thanks, Mason.
Sure.
If I knew today, like if I know what I know today back when I started the podcast, it never would have happened. Like, because it's like so intense, like just the time and resources and money that goes into it. And I'm so glad that I didn't know that back then. And I'm so glad that I did the podcast because it is one of my most favorite things. And I'm so grateful I have it. But I guess that's part of what I want to say is like, you can always start simple. Like mine evolved to like have botanical illustrators, and then I'm a knitter, and so I knit all those sweaters to match the herbs that we're talking about. Like that is not required. on most podcasts. So you start simple and then build from there. And one thing is like, I don't know the stats on this, but it's something like 98% of the podcasts don't make it past like episode 5 or something. So I think it is like worth sitting with it and like really thinking about it and like, and just, yeah, really thinking about that and having an idea of like what it's going to take to get it done. But like I said earlier, I think this idea of like a 10 series podcast could be really fun to do. Like if someone's like, oh, like I'm thinking about doing a podcast, like, just try it out with like your goal of like doing 10 or 5, whatever it is, like instead of like this something that might feel too big, like to do it in, for years and years, just kind of have it sandwiched in something that has like a timeline on it. Because I think there could be so many cool, like super focused subject matter. And like as like practitioners, I think it could be a great way to find clients. Like if you really work on like skin issues, like you could have a 10-part series about the skin and herbs. And so I think there's a lot of cool things people could do with that. So my tips would be start small, really think about it and sit with it, really get an idea. I didn't take a podcast class, but those exist out there. I actually hired a production company to help me get started. So they just helped me for like 2 months to get started and showed me the ropes and stuff. But getting help to get started, like don't feel like you have to recreate the wheel because people have done all that work for you. So doing that. And then getting on a podcast, I definitely have opinions on that. I try not to be like mean and judgy, but the thing, like a pet peeve of mine is when someone messages me, whether I know them or not, and they're like, I want to be on your show because I have a course to promote. And I'm like,
yeah, that's interesting.
That's not why I'm here. Like that's, I estimate that my podcast cost at least $1,000 per week to promote. And then all of my team, is working on that. And so I'm here for my audience and to support my guests. Like I really want to support my guests. So I'm happy to promote people's stuff. I mean, that's part of it. But I'm not like interested in someone being on the show just to promote their something, like there needs to be substance there. And if people they're like trying to get on my show, but they've obviously never listened to it. That's also a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. So like, I love when someone like cold calls or whatever, but they're like, here's what I have to offer your show. And I clearly know the format of your show and what your show is about. And here's what I want to offer. And like, here's what I'll be promoting, something like that. But the whole, like, I'd like to be on your show so I can promote my new book. Like I've gotten so many like that. Like, it's just kind of like it's a tough one to like get over that. I have with a couple people like coached them through it. Cause obviously like they just don't know my perspective. And so I've like, tried to like softly let them know. I actually have like I don't think we send it out very often, but I have like an article on my website that's like a hidden thing that we just send the URL that says like, here's how you can successfully get on podcast shows by like making a proposal that works. And it like links to other articles that talk about that and stuff. So I do feel very opinionated about all of that.
Is that a secret link or is that something we can share on the show notes?
Oh, we can share it on the show. I hope it's nice. Like I might have been in my very much like unsolicited advice double Virgo mode when I wrote it. I think I was like writing it like had a little bit of annoyance, but hopefully it sounds nice. But I can get it.
That's funny.
Mason, you said you had a bunch of ideas also?
Yeah. I love the limited series idea, by the way, Rosalee. Like some of my favorite series, say on Netflix, are the limited series. Although you're always kind of sad when they're over. Also, it's like sometimes it's like Michael Jordan hitting that game-winning shot at the end of the the 1998 finals. Like he went out on the high note or whatever. I really love that idea. Me, I can't do that. I love setting 10-year goals of 100, just continuously growing and improving and iterating. But as far as like not necessarily starting the podcast, which I could probably expound upon that quite a bit as well. I do also have thoughts and opinions on getting on other shows. Please don't send 20-page emails with attached PDFs about entire bios and resumes and works and links and stuff like that. Please send short and sweet emails directly to us, clearly not mass produced, clearly not copy pasted, clearly personalized. Send us personalized, short and sweet emails of what kind of value can you provide this particular audience and why. Send us maybe 1 or 2 links to a YouTube video you've done, a podcast you've done before, a sample of like how you communicate and speak, so we could immediately find out if you're a good fit for the show. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. It's just, and again, like, I don't want to sound like I'm gatekeeping. I'm totally open to having strangers on the show. I just don't want it to feel like it's a business pitch. I want it to be presented as how can you provide value to the HerbRally audience? You know, so it's simple, short and sweet. How can you provide value? Send us an example of your work and your communication style, and even more so, develop a legitimate relationship with me first. That's how I work. Like, I develop relationships with lots of people, and go figure, you know, people want to like talk to me and stuff like that. So I had one other point that I wanted to say, but that's kind of the gist of it. I think is the relationships. That was it. If you could get someone to recommend you, like say you have a friend of a friend of a friend, get some sort of introduction would be really ideal as well. So again, don't want to sound like I'm gatekeeping or complaining. It just makes, as you receive so much cold outreach, it's a good I think method to go about it.
Yeah.
Ditto to all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Anything
flattery.
else? Flattery.
Compliment me. Please compliment me. Tell me, yeah.
Anyone who wants to start a podcast, don't worry about being successful. Just have fun. I mean, that's it. Just go and have. I mean, if you get one person to listen to it, great, fantastic. You know, even if you just make it for yourself, and you get to listen to it, you get to go back to it in 20 years and be like, oh wow, that's amazing, and I get to record. You know, I recorded that and that kind of a thing. You know, I've often thought about just you know, how fun would it be just to have, you know, just your friends on and, you know, capture that moment, right, with your friends. And it can be a podcast, whatever you want to call it. But again, it doesn't have to be successful, but it might be, you know, it could be. It could turn into something that's really amazing. But try to take the pressure off yourself a little bit. That's for sure. Would be my.
I heard this author, Ryan Holiday, recently talk about that. He's an author and basically says, don't write a book because you want it to be good for your business or it's a good marketing tool, it's a business card, etc. Write a book because you can't not write the book. It has to come out of you. You have to put it out there.
Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of what you said there. Like you have to talk about this subject. It's just so important to you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I first started blogging. I was in middle school, just because I like to write, and I wanted I wanted someone else to read it, so I just put it somewhere. And the internet was a new thing, and it was so easy to just click publish. And what you said, Thomas, there with just starting to start because you want to share, and who cares if anyone listens or hears what I have to share? Who cares if somebody else will read what I write? This is what I've got. This is making art. I'm making something and I'm putting it out there, and I'm making it because it is calling to be let out. And who knows what will happen once it is let out. Exactly. And now there's so much technology to facilitate that on small scale and big scale. Like you can go large scale with Apple and Spotify and yada, yada. But you can also go really small scale. Social media is a form of podcasting or audio dissemination of information. Substack, you can share photography, you can share audio, you can share video, you can share writing. That's also another way to share audio related dissemination of information or interviews or whatever else it is that you're passionate about sharing. So just remembering that if there is something that wishes to come out, there are many ways of allowing that force to arise.
Right.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Anything else that y'all wanted to share before we close out? I thought it might be fun to hear some of your other favorite podcasts or whatever else you might want to share before we close out for today.
Who wants to start?
Mason.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. So it's funny because I have been listening to podcasts. The very first podcast that I listened to was Herb Mentor Radio, way back in the day. John Gallagher heavily influenced my work today, and HerbRally podcasts, etc. And I noticed the season of my life that I'm in. I constantly search out podcasts that I'm really intrigued by. So I don't necessarily have other herbal podcasts to recommend besides Herbal Radio presented by Mountain Rose Herbs and Herbs with Rosalee. Those are and what is it called? The HerbRally podcast as well. But besides that, I mean, I say if you're just kind of getting into podcasts, whatever interest you're in, you're going to find a podcast about it. And so currently, just for the listener, this isn't going to be useful for you, but I listen to Colin and Samir and Creator Science because I'm very interested in learning about how to be a creator on the internet. So it has nothing to do with health, wellness, or anything like that, but it's all just to illustrate. If you're into any subject, I highly recommend you just delve deep, find the podcasts that are calling out to you, and just try lots of different ones. But there's tons of great herbal podcasts out there. But that's kind of my spiel. I love audiobooks. I love podcasts. There's all sorts of different shows for your particular interest graph at that moment in time.
Yeah, great.
Thomas.
Oh yeah. And this was going to sound maybe a little selfish, but I had no idea what what hosting a podcast was going to do for my own mental health. As somebody who is very introverted, I come to work and I go home and, I kind of, it's my wife and I, and we're there, and that's kind of all I ever do. And podcast has allowed me to talk to so many different people and interview so many amazing, wonderful people who have helped me tremendously to, not only learn more about plants and learn more about herbalism, which is fantastic. And in the last couple of years, I've learned more about herbalism just through this than I'd ever learned in the last 13 years or so of working at Mountain Rose. Not because I'm not surrounded by amazing herbalists here. It was just that I was always focused on the arts and the marketing, and this has kind of brought me into that world a little bit more. But just hearing people's stories and hearing about their passions and the loving, incredibly loving community that is herbalism. I'm just blown away at the amount that, and I always say this on the podcast, that the herbalists they want to give everything away. I've never met a group of people like it. They want to just give it all away to you. They want you to be healed. They want you to have a better place in this world. And I just cannot believe that I'm so lucky to be able to talk to so many amazing people every week.
Thanks,
I
Thomas.
love that, Thomas. That makes me think of when I started my podcast, it was 2021. So we're still in a lot of COVID lockdown. And it was so incredible to be able to talk to people and be with herbalists at a time we weren't having conferences. And to this day, the reason the podcast is such a huge favorite thing of mine is because I get inspired with every episode, which it's I just interviewed Mary Morgaine Squire about ginkgo, which was not really on my radar. And now I'm I want to do everything ginkgo. Or a couple of years ago, I had Karen Sanders and Jim McDonald talk about calamus root within the same weeks. And I that just set me off on this whole calamus root deep dive, and became my plant ally. And now I've, know so much more. So there's just that constant inspiration of working with people who are just, really inspired. So I appreciate that. I've listened to, I want to say, most of the herbal podcasts out there, and I've never heard a bad one. I also wanted to specifically mention Rosemary's, her new Herbal Elders podcast has been amazing. And all the herbal podcasts out there, fantastic. One of my personal favorites, which I don't think is going to be widely popular, but there's one called Drive All Night, and it's a Tori Amos podcast, and they spend 2 to 3 hours going over one of Tori's songs, which is, I think, the appropriate time to spend talking about one of her songs. So that's one of my favorite podcasts outside of the herbal world. But yeah, I'm not sure that'll be widely popular. So understandably, you got to be diving deep. But like Mason, you were saying, it's whatever you're interested in, there's someone out there who's made a podcast about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love listening to podcasts also, and I feel so privileged and honored and lucky to be able to be part of the Mountain Rose Herbs Herbal Radio podcast and this community of herbalists doing beautiful things in the world. A podcast that I wanted to shout out beyond all of the wonderful ones here with HerbRally and Rosalee and Herbs and the Herbal Radio is one from Emergence Magazine, which is a print magazine and also an online magazine. And they have a podcast. And what they always say is that they're exploring threads connecting ecology, culture, and spirituality. And it's beautiful writers and beautiful, beautiful folks that they're interviewing. And then I also consume lots of podcasts relating to surfing and the creative process. And currently I'm on this writing project. And Rosemary, hi!
Hi there! Oh my goodness.
I just told her maybe Rosemary wants to share about her podcast a little bit, but since Rosalee brought it up.
Oh.
Yeah, we're closing up right now. Tell us, hey everyone, this is Rosemary Gladstar.
Hi, so good to see you all. Thank you, Jiling. Yeah, I'd be happy to tell you. I'm sorry I couldn't join you for the whole panel, but I started a podcast, actually in truth, that's called Voices of the Herbal Elders. And I started it because so many of my friends who are in their 70s and 80s and 90s now are passing away, you know, just like people do. And I wanted to capture the stories of these people. They played such a vital role in the regeneration of American herbalism as we know it today. Some of these people were like pioneers, you know, in bringing clinical herbalism back or product making back. And I just felt their stories were so important to share and usually so fascinating and funny and fun. And so for me, it's been just this huge pleasure because I'm focusing just really on people that I've had known a long time, you know, usually for 50 years or so. And so I know a lot of their stories, so I can like kind of entice some of the juiciness out. And it's been just a joy, you know. And then we also invite people to share the stories of their herbal elders too, because of course the herbal elders that I know encompass just a small part of the herbal community. So it's really just a kind of a passion for me. It was a personal, sort of a personal mission that I had, that I wanted to preserve these stories. And the whole idea is to capture some of these stories and then archive them so they're available for others when this generation passes on, which we're all destined to do. So yeah, I'm having so much fun. And I was talking to Mason about it recently, you know, and saying to him, like, I have maybe about another 13. And he goes, oh, it's self-ending. And I said, oh yeah, I'm not going to go on and on and on with this. You know, I just want to, you know, interview those people that I know personally. So, and I'd like to, you know, I was thinking it'd be a really nice bookend to end it with interviews with 3 or 4 of the younger generation of herbalists that represent the different aspects of herbalism, from farming to clinical herbalism to product making, you know, just because then it kind of brings it full circle, you know. It's been just a joyous project and so much fun to do. And I know nothing about the back end. All I know about how is to turn on the Zoom and say hello to my friends. The whole back end is handled by my incredible team, by Emma and Helen, who do all that work. So I get to do the fun part. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, another beautiful project from Rosemary. I was so surprised when I saw, like, whoa, how is Rosemary also doing a podcast now? She's already got so many projects and is flying everywhere all at the same time.
There's 10 of me, actually. No, yeah. No, I don't feel like I'm doing very much anymore, actually, and have kind of been, I'm sort of slumbering, but this project fed my soul, which is the reason that I wanted to do it. And I was hoping it would feed the soul of others. So yeah, it's been very meaningful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Rosemary. And I'll be putting a link to Rosemary's podcast and Rosalee and Thomas and Mason and all this in the show notes. And thank you everyone so much for joining our conversation today. What a blast to converse with other herbal podcasters.
That was great, Jiling. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Super
All
fun.
right. And for our listeners, thank you so much for checking out this show this iteration of Herbal Radio and Tea Talks Roundtable through Mountain Rose for the podcast side and HerbRally for the video YouTube side. And until next time, Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mason.
You bet.
Bye,
Mason.
Rosalee and Thomas.
Bye-bye.